Cahuachi, in Peru, was a major ceremonial center of the Nazca culture, based from 01 AD to about 500 AD in the coastal area of the Central Andes. It overlooked some of the Nazca lines. The Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Orefici has been excavating at the site for the past few decades. The site contains over 40 mounds topped with adobe structures. The huge architectural complex covers 0.6 square miles. The American archaeologist Helen Silverman has also conducted long-term, multi-stage research and written about the full context of Nazca society at Cahuachi, published in a lengthy study in 1993. The past several years, longtime researcher Omar Faizi has conducted in-depth study of the Nazca lines with startling conclusions to his study. Scholars once thought the site was the capital of the Nazca state, but have determined that the permanent population was quite small. They believe that it was a pilgrimage center, whose population increased greatly in relation to major ceremonial events. New research has suggested that 40 of the mounds were natural hills modified to appear as artificial constructions. Support for the pilgrimage theory comes from archaeological evidence of sparse population at Cahuachi, the spatial patterning of the site, and ethnographic evidence from the Virgin of Jaffa pilgrimage in the nearby Ica Valley. Looting is the greatest problem facing the site today. Most of the burial sites surrounding Cahuachi were not known until recently and tempting targets for looters. Geographic and environmental overview. The Cahuachi site is located near the south coast of Peru and found in the Nazca Valley. Within the Nazca Valley is the Rio Grande-Do Nazca drainage system and is where the Nazca culture developed. The area is ecologically classified as pre-mountain desert formation. Quote, "There is a very important ecological transition going on within the Rio Grande-Do Nazca drainage system, transitioning from pre-mountain desert zone of the coast to Chuapiunga up towards the highlands, and east of the town Nazca begins the transition to true Yunga. Yunga refers to the Quechua Yungas meaning warm valley. The site itself can be found on the southern side of the Nazca River, one of 10 major tributaries that form the Rio Grande-Do Nazca drainage system. The Nazca Valley Grande drainage area is very dry in the summer and extremely hot. Precipitation varies between none and 125 millimeters. Temperature averages 21.3 degrees Celsius. To the north and south, Cahuachi faces two pampas, or flat plain-like terrain, Pampa de San Jose and Pampa de Artaco, and on these plains is where the famous ground drawings of the Nazca Desert are found. The Rio Grande region's soils are available for irrigation agriculture with limitations. Cahuachi is located off of the valley bottom of the treeless hills and terraces beneath Pampa de Artaco, and has been known to be subject to strong winds that are capable of becoming sandstorms. It is on these treeless hills that formed the core majority of artificial constructions at Cahuachi. There is also present sporadic rains and cyclical floods which result in water erosion of the terrain, which made some parts of the valley uninhabitable, which influenced the settlement pattern of Cahuachi. History of research at Cahuachi. Dr. Frabi was the first to actually acknowledge and excavate the site of Cahuachi in the Nazca region in 1922. The following researchers have also studied and interpreted the site: Krober, Teo, Doring, Strong, Robinson. Among the most extensive research done at Cahuachi was the excavations conducted by William Strong. Strong was one of the only archaeologists who took a broad approach to the site, contextualizing it within Nazca society and South Coast prehistory. He set out to find stratigraphic evidence that would resolve the gap between Paracas and Nazca Nazca styles in the region. He also did settlement pattern studies in order to find out the kinds of activities that went on at Cahuachi. Most recently, Helen Silverman began conducting a surface survey and excavation of the site, seeking to confirm and reveal more information from Strong's analysis. And Cahuachi is also where she began her dissertation fieldwork on early Nazca society in 1983. She later concludes from her data and analysis how Cahuachi would have functioned as a ceremonial center and its role in state formation and urbanism, within a regional and pan-Andean scope. Chronology in Nazca-style pottery. There is a major emphasis on Nazca-style pottery at Cahuachi, recognized as a discrete style first by Adolphe Bastien. Nazca style is a polychrome pottery and is generally noted as having a South Coast provenance and is named Nazca for its focal regional distribution in the Nazca Valley. There are two principal modalities in the decorative style of Nazca pottery: monumental and proliferous, coined terms by Rowe. Monumental refers to the types of Nazca pottery with so-called realistic designs, while proliferous describes more conventionalized motifs with volutes, rays, and points. Gaitin and Kroeber established three categorizable characteristics: shape, color, and design, and based on the relationships between these attributes came up with four chronological phases or substyles of Nazca pottery: A, the earliest; X, transitional; B, latest; and Y, miscellaneous or otherwise unable to be phased. Later came the Dawson seriation, which subdivided the Nazca style into 9 phases. These are then associated into certain periods and epochs. Monumental includes Nazca 1-4 and Gaitin and Kroeber's Nazca A, while proliferous encompasses the innovation of Nazca 5 and Nazca 6 and 7 pottery and corresponds to Gaitin and Kroeber's Nazca Y. Because of the frequency of Nazca 3 pottery and its association with architecture at the site, the conclusion is that Cahuachi is early intermediate period of the Ico-ceramic periods. Nazca 1 and 2 are represented at a lesser degree, but are still significantly present as well. One of Strong's goals in his research at Cahuachi was to resolve the temporal relationship between Paracas and Nazca-style pottery, which was still stratigraphically unproven. Strong's conclusions were that the ceremonial structures at Cahuachi date to the Middle Nazca culture era phase, and not Late Nazca. Instead, Late Nazca dates were only found to be associated with graves. According to Silverman, all later scholars are in basic agreement with Strong. Agriculture and economy. Cahuachi is considered a non-urban ceremonial center, meaning that it was never densely occupied and people did not actually live there long term. This is evidenced by perishable and temporary wattle and daub-like structures excavated on site. It was more of a pilgrimage, a religious destination. So, although for the extensive evidence of Nazca pottery that is used to date the site, and considering the massive specialized culture that goes with it, the evidence for craft specialization and intensive trade and agriculture is understandably limited than if the site were a permanent residence of a large population. Agriculture. Edible food materials present. At least 15 species of shellfish remains were found at Cahuachi, as well as 1 type of echinoderm, and 4 types of fish. Interesting to note as well, is that the most abundant types of botanical remains found at Cahuachi were also most easily transported, such as peanut, and were also locally and seasonally available, like the hurongo fruit native to the area, and more importantly, Cahuachi. It is also important to note that the reason for why there is a limited amount of edible plant remains found here is because Cahuachi was not a permanently inhabited place, so any food that was brought there was kept in small storage and quickly consumed. Other edible foods found at Cahuachi include potato, sweet potato, manioc, beans, squash, and achira. Excavations at the Unit 16 wall revealed loose earth and some wind-blown organic remains found within post holes that had been excavated down to sterile soil. Materials recovered include huarongo seed, PACA leaf, guayaba seed, and llama excrement. Another excavation at the Unit 16 wall of 5 circular and roughly circular depressions contained, among other things, guinea pig hair and gourd fragments. A special food preparation area evidenced by the presence of a corn popper and the ritual importance of corn in the Andes was also found at Cahuachi. Small storage facilities and vessels that would have contained food and drink only sufficient for short visits to the ceremonial center as supports the fact that Cahuachi was not permanently inhabited at all time and therefore most likely did not have intensive agriculture at the site itself. That being said, all these remains had to come from somewhere, and so they can be used for evidence to indicate the types of food most popular and abundant in this area and at the time. The presence of the food materials and the absence of most of the cultivation within the site of Cahuachi can also be indicative of trade networks within the surrounding communities. Agriculture. Ritual food materials present. Among ritual or ceremonial remains recovered through Strong's excavations at Cahuachi in Unit 2, also known as the Great Temple, were llama remains, bird plumage, as well as other things like fine pottery and panpipes, which he also interpreted as feasting and sacrificial materials. Strong's 1957 excavations of a multitude of llama remains on the Great Temple, as well as some rare guinea pig remains at the excavation of Unit 19 are a small indication of the types of animals available in this area. At least 23 guinea pig remains, used as sacrificial offerings, were recovered. All had the heads jerked out of articulation, and pristine preservation of the soft tissues allowed Silverman to determine that their undersides had been split open from the neck down, resembling modern-day divination rituals. Caches of maize, huarongo pods, as well as a small concentration of shell were all found at Cahuachi, and are, again, considered to have ritual purposes rather than agricultural significance. At one of the more well-known constructions at Cahuachi is the Room of the Posts. Here, in front of a deep niche, were 2 cylindrical depressions resembling post holes, and within them were found 10 unworked pieces of spondylus, a shell sacred in the Andean region. Within a round depression excavated in the room they found a cache of huarongo pods, 16 whole pots and hundreds of sherds, all dating to Nazca style, were also found in the room, along with a cache of blue-painted aji peppers, 4 portable looms, pyro-engraved gourd rattles, and plain gourd containers. All were deposited as offerings, which makes sense since this is a ceremonial center. The abundance of the huarongo fruit, seeds and pods as the site, in both consumable and ritual use, is because it could be grown within the Cahuachi region and therefore was most at hand and used in everyday life, making it life-sustaining as well as richly significant. All the evidence within this category are relating to ritual and sacrificial purposes rather than direct agricultural practices at Cahuachi. Considering that this was a non-urban center, it seems safe to assume there was no intensive agriculture going on at Cahuachi, and rather any domesticated resource evidence found was brought to Cahuachi from the outside, like nearby cities or towns, and could quite possibly fall more under the category of trade rather than agriculture. Economy, trade. Because Cahuachi was a non-urban ceremonial center, there was not a permanent population living long-term within the site. This means that the people who did spend time there were not there long enough to do things like set up an intensive agricultural system, or contribute to large-scale craft specialization and production. That is not to say that they did not do any of these things, but just not on as large of a scale as an actual city would. Cahuachi was, however, a ceremonial center and, more importantly, a religious destination. So there were people going to and from the site on a regular basis, developing a sort of pilgrimage trade system. Most things, like pottery, food, animals, and other transportable items, were brought to Cahuachi by individuals. Among ritual or ceremonial remains recovered through Strong's excavations at Cahuachi in Unit 2 were things like fine pottery and pan pipes. Not all Nazca pottery was produced at Cahuachi. It is much more likely, especially for the fancy pottery, that it was produced in nearby regional centers where this type of craft specialization was prominent, and then brought to and used at Cahuachi, indicative of trade goings on at Cahuachi rather than craft production. Economy, craft specialization and production. Economy, textiles. Cahuachi's role as a ceremonial center has left a major amount of its society's material expression of the cosmological beliefs, displaying their beliefs through such material items as textiles, ceramics, and decoration or iconography on these items. In Silverman's excavations, many loose threads, unattached three-dimensional embroideries, spun and unspun fiber, and several spindle whorls were all found. Strong also claims to have found fancy textile remains, possibly used in Nazca funerary shrouds or elite priestly attire, which would all make sense to the ceremonial center claim at Cahuachi. There is also evidence of the presence of craft quarters in the plaza at Cahuachi. Silverman believes that Cahuachi was a locus of textile production where the shrouds of those special individuals buried at the site and the elaborate costumes worn by Nazca priests and/or ritual performers were produced. Economy, pottery. Ceramic analysis at Cahuachi supports Silverman's assertion that Cahuachi was a non-urban ceremonial center because there is a predominance of fine ware rather than plain ware at the site, on the rate of 70% to 30%, which, if you think about it, would be unquestionably reversed if Cahuachi were a permanently inhabited urban area. The majority of plain ware that was found at the site were mainly those used for small-scale storage and burials, then those used for food service. Fine ware of ritual significance was decorated and was used for burials and also included technologically complex panpipes, which is a form of craft specialization. It is also interesting to note that family-sized cooking pots are rare at the site. Not all Nazca pottery was produced at Cahuachi. It is much more likely, especially for the fine pottery, that it was produced in nearby regional centers where this type of craft specialization was prominent, and then brought to and used at Cahuachi. Again, this fact is more indicative of trade goings on at Cahuachi rather than large-scale craft production at the site.